The stars outside the window of the Varric flagship were calm and cold. They always were. Space did not care about politics. Space did not care about borders. Space did not care about the careful, ancient rules that every civilized species had agreed to follow when they decided to go to war with one another. But the Varric cared. They cared very much. High Commander Vile Korath stood in front of the large viewing window and looked out at the stars. He was tall, even for a Varric. His skin was a deep gray blue and his four eyes caught the light of distant suns as he turned to look at the officers behind him. His uniform was pressed and perfect. Every medal on his chest had been earned in battle. Proper battle, the kind that followed the rules, the kind that both sides agreed to, was the kind that ended cleanly and honorably with someone surrendering and someone accepting and everyone going home. That was how war was supposed to work. He had fought 6 wars in his long career. He had won 4 of them. He had lost 2. But in all 6, both sides had been honorable. Both sides had followed the galactic accords of engagement. Everyone had known what the rules were. Everyone had followed them. And when it was over, clean, simple, civilized. He turned away from the window and walked to the long table where his senior officers were seated. On the table was a thick document printed on deep blue paper, the traditional color of a Varric Declaration of Honorable War. It had taken 3 weeks to prepare. The legal team had reviewed every word, and the high priest of the accord had blessed the document in the old ceremony. Everything was correct. Everything was in order. "Send it," Vale Korath said. The communications officer nodded and began the transmission. The Terran Republic's diplomatic station above the colony world of Hera's Point was a quiet place most of the time. It was a small building in space, really. A few offices, a conference room, a kitchen where Ambassador Lena Vasquez made her coffee every morning at 6. She was a short woman with brown skin and dark hair that she kept tied back tightly. She had been an ambassador for 11 years. She had handled trade disputes, border arguments, cultural misunderstandings. She had never handled a war declaration before. When the message arrived, her assistant Dory knocked on her door and handed her a printed copy without saying a word. Dory's face said everything. Vasquez read the document at her desk. She read it slowly. She read the formal language of the declaration, the list of grievances about the Hera's Point border colony, the accusation that Terran mining operations had crossed into Varric claimed space. She read the part that named the official start date of hostilities, 21 days from now. She read the part that listed the designated engagement zone, a region of Space 3 light hours from the colony. She read the rules: no attacks on civilian ships, no bombardment without 72 hours of advance warning, no targeting of medical vessels, full respect for surrender protocols, and a formal ceasefire request process that required 3 days of response time. She put the document down. She picked up her coffee and took a long, slow sip. Then she pressed the button on her desk communicator. "Get me the Defense Council," she said, "and someone get the Varric delegation on a live channel. I want to speak to them directly." The Varric delegation was already waiting when the live channel opened. There were 3 of them on screen: a diplomat named Varese, a legal advisor, and a young aide who was trying very hard not to look nervous. Varese was smooth and professional, with the polite smile of someone who had done this many times and expected everything to go according to plan. "Ambassador Vasquez," Varese said pleasantly, "I trust you have received our declaration of honorable war." "I have," Vasquez said. "Excellent. We expect your Republic's honor pledge within 48 hours. Me along with your proposed fleet composition for the engagement zone. Naturally, we will share ours as well, as required by Article 7 of the—" "Yes," Vasquez said. "We'll get back to you." There was a pause on the Varric end. Varese blinked his upper eyes, all 4 of them opening slightly wider in what, for a Varric, was the equivalent of a confused frown. "I beg your pardon?" "We'll get back to you," Vasquez said again. Her voice was calm. Her face was calm. She gave nothing away. "Thank you for the document. We'll be in touch." She closed the channel. Varese stared at the blank screen for a moment. Then he turned to his legal advisor. "Is that a response? Is there a protocol for that response?" The legal advisor flipped through his documents. There is no section in the Galactic Accords covering the phrase, "We'll get back to you." Perhaps it is a translation issue, the aide offered quietly. Varese thought about it. Then he nodded slowly. Yes, probably a translation issue. These humans have only been part of the galactic community for 60 years. Their grasp of diplomatic language is still developing. He straightened his jacket and smiled again. They will send the honor pledge. All species do. 3 days passed. No honor pledge arrived. On the fourth day, a short message came through from the Terran Republic's Defense Council. It contained no honor pledge, no proposed fleet composition, and no reference to Article 7 of anything. It simply said, "Message received. We are reviewing our options. A further communication will follow as appropriate." Val Korath read the message twice. He handed it to his chief of staff, Admiral Wren, who read it twice as well. "What does reviewing our options mean?" Wren asked. "I don't know," Val Korath said. "In the context of the Accords, it means nothing in the context of the Accords," Val Korath said firmly. "There are no options to review. The process is clear. They receive the declaration. They issue the honor pledge. They name their fleet. We name ours. We fight on the agreed date in the agreed location. One side wins, the other surrenders. It has always been this way." He was quiet for a moment. "Perhaps," he added more softly, "they are simply not familiar with the full process. 60 years is not long. Or even the Moor took 80 years to fully understand the Accords." Wren nodded. "Should we send them a guide?" Valkorath considered this. It felt slightly condescending, sending a new species a guide on how to go to war properly. But it also felt responsible. He did not want this conflict to become messy because the humans did not understand how things worked. "Send them the official Accord manual," he said, "the simplified version with helpful diagrams." In the Terran Republic's Defense Ministry, deep in the mountain city of New Ankara on Earth, a group of generals and admirals sat around a long table and looked at each other. The Varric Guide to Honorable Warfare sat in the center of the table. No one had opened it. General Harlan Cross, a broad-shouldered man with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of eyes that had seen too many things, leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "So they want us to tell them where our fleet will be, how many ships we're sending, and what weapons we plan to use," he said, "before the battle." "That is correct," said Admiral Yui Tanaka, who had actually read the Varric Guide. "And they'll do the same for us. Full transparency. Both sides fight in the designated zone. The smaller force surrenders when they've lost more than 40% of their ships. Medical vessels are off limits. Civilian planets are off limits. No surprise attacks. No deception." "No, no," Cross said. Everyone looked at him. "I'm not saying no to the war," he continued. "Kidun, I'm saying no to that version of the war." He leaned forward and put his hands on the table. "We have 3 border colonies in this region. Hera's Point has 40,000 civilians. If we send our fleet to a designated engagement zone 3 light hours away, what is stopping the Varric from simply flying in the other direction and taking everything? The Accords forbid." "I'm not interested in what the Accords forbid," Cross said. "I'm interested in what actually keeps our people alive." Silence. Tanaka looked down at the guide. "The rest of the galaxy follows these rules. The rest of the galaxy has been fighting by these rules for so long, they've forgotten what real war looks like," Cross said. "We haven't." He paused. We never did." He stood up and walked to the strategy map on the wall. A massive display showing the positions of Varric forces, Terran colonies, supply lines, shipping routes, deep space relay stations, and every other piece of the puzzle. "We're not going to tell them where our fleet will be," he said. "We're not going to fight in a designated box. We're going to fight like we actually want to win." He pointed to the Varric supply chain, a long, thin line of logistics ships running between their territory and the front. "This," he said, "is where we start." Back on the Varric flagship, Val Korath was reviewing battle plans with his senior staff. Everything was proceeding as expected. The engagement date was 16 days away. His fleet was assembled. His formations were practiced. He had fought against 4 different species in his career and had never encountered anything that truly surprised him. War was war. It followed its patterns. It followed its rules. His aide entered the room and placed a message on the table. "From the Terran Republic, sir." Valkarath picked it up. He read it. He read it again. Then he placed it back down, very carefully, as if it were something delicate. "They're not sending an honor pledge," he said. "No, sir. They're not accepting the engagement zone." "No, sir. They say—" He stopped. He picked the message up and read the key line aloud, slowly, as if trying to make it make sense. "When the Terran Republic does not recognize the authority of the Galactic Accords of Engagement over its military operations and will respond to the current aggression in a manner it deems appropriate and necessary." The room was very quiet. Ren cleared his throat. "They could still be—" "They're not confused," Valkarath said. His voice was low. "They understood us perfectly." He set the message down and looked at his star map. Something cold moved through him. Not quite fear, but something adjacent to it. Something he had not felt before. Not in 6 wars, not in decades of service. It was the feeling of not knowing what was coming next. "Double the watch on all supply lines," he said quietly, "and find out everything you can about how humans have fought their wars. Every conflict, every record, everything." His aide nodded and left quickly. Valkarath turned back to the star map and stared at the small, scattered collection of worlds that made up the Terran Republic. A young civilization, a minor power by any measure, 60 years in space, no ancient traditions, no ceremonial war banners. He stared at those small worlds for a long time. The stars outside the window remained calm and cold. They always were. The battle date arrived like any other day in space, quietly, without ceremony, without color. The stars looked the same. The silence was the same. There was no sun rising, no birds singing, no clock on a wall ticking down to 0. There was only the cold dark and the Varric fleet hanging in it like a polished blade, waiting. Valkarath stood on the command deck of his flagship and watched his fleet take formation. It was a beautiful thing in its way. Hundreds of warships arranged in precise order. The heavy cruisers at the front, the carrier wings spread on the flanks, the support vessels arranged behind in careful rows. Every ship was exactly where it was supposed to be. Every captain knew their role. Every crew was ready. They had been here for 2 hours already in the designated engagement zone, 3 light hours from the Hera's Point colony. The zone had been chosen carefully. It was far enough from civilian populations that any stray fire would not cause harm, open enough that both fleets could maneuver freely, close enough to the disputed territory that the winner could move quickly to claim it. It was a good zone. Valkarath had approved it himself. Now they waited for the humans. "Any sign of their fleet?" he asked. "No." "Sir," said the sensor operator, "nothing within range." "Check again." "I have checked, sir. There is nothing. No fleet signature, no drive emissions, no approach vectors. The humans are not here." Valkarath clasped his hands behind his back. It was early still. The battle was scheduled to begin at the top of the 3rd hour. Perhaps the humans were simply late. Their fleet might be approaching from a different angle. Sensor shadows happened. It was not uncommon. He waited. The 3rd hour came. The battle time arrived. The engagement zone was empty except for the Varric fleet. Valkarath stood perfectly still and said nothing for 1 full minute. Around him, his officers exchanged small glances. The kind of glances people exchange when they are not sure whether to speak. "They're not coming," Admiral Wren said quietly, stepping to his side. "They might be—" "Sir." The communications officer turned in her seat. Her voice was tight. "We're getting a signal from Supply Station 7. It's a distress beacon." Valkarath turned. "What kind of distress?" "Explosion, sir. Multiple explosions. The station's cargo bays are gone. The fuel depots are—" She stopped. She pressed her earpiece harder and listened. "The station is gone, sir. Total destruction. No survivors reported." No one spoke. "Supply Station 7 is 40 light minutes from here," Wren said slowly, working through the math. "That means whatever happened there happened while we were traveling to this zone. We wouldn't have received the signal until now." "What destroyed it?" Valkarath asked. "Unknown. Sensors show no ship signatures in that area. No debris from an attacking vessel." In the station logs show, the officer paused again, reading the incoming data. They logged a collision with a field of very small objects, extremely small. The logs called them debris at first, then they changed the classification. To what? Drones, sir. Very small drones. The logs say they appeared from nowhere. No launch signature, no origin point. They simply materialized in the path of the station and detonated. The command deck was absolutely silent. Valkorath understood what this meant, but he made himself go through it slowly, step by step, the way a commander was supposed to think rather than react. Drones, small ones, pre-positioned, which meant they had been placed there before the battle date, before the war had officially begun, while the Varric were still in the process of sending the declaration. While the Varric were preparing their fleet, their formations, their perfect ceremony of honorable conflict, the humans had not been preparing an honor pledge. They had been placing drones in the supply lines. "Sir," said a second officer from the far end of the deck, "we're getting signals from Relay Post 11 and the forward logistics hub at Grid 9. Same pattern, explosions. Small drones. No origin point." "How many drones?" Valkorath asked. "Hundreds at minimum, possibly thousands. They're scattered across a wide area of the supply corridor. Every major junction point." The officer looked up from his screen. "Sir, our entire forward supply chain is under attack. Right now, while we are standing here, in the engagement zone, waiting." Valkorath turned back to the viewing window. His perfect, one-gleaming fleet hung in space in front of him, every ship exactly where it should be, every crew ready for a battle that was not coming. Not here. Not in this box they had agreed on. Not in this place where the humans were supposed to meet them, because the humans had never intended to meet them here. In the hours that followed, the picture became clearer, and clearer was worse. The drone strikes had not been random. They had been surgical. Every target was a logistics node, fuel storage, ammunition depots, food and water supplies for long-range patrols. The humans had spent the 21 days of the declaration period mapping every Varric supply point in the region, and then they had filled those points with silent, sleeping drones set to wake up when triggered by a signal. The signal had gone out at the exact moment the battle was supposed to begin. While the Varric fleet was positioned in the engagement zone, staring at empty space, their supply infrastructure was being eaten alive by weapons that weighed less than a standard cargo container. Valkorath ordered the fleet to move. He pulled them out of the engagement zone and redirected them toward the supply corridor to render assistance and assess the damage. As they moved, more reports came in, not just from the supply chain. A Varric patrol near the outer edge of the contested region had picked up an anomaly. A ship running completely dark, no drive emissions, no transponder signal, moving on passive momentum through an asteroid field. When they went to intercept, the ship had simply vanished into the rocks. On sensor echoes suggested it was a human vessel, a small one, perhaps a scout. But then why had it been sitting there for what the patrol estimated was 3 weeks? "They were watching us," Wren said when this report reached the command deck. "That scout ship was positioned there before the declaration was sent." "They knew," Valkorath said. "They anticipated us. They began their military movements before we sent the declaration." Valkorath sat down in his commander's chair, something he rarely did during active operations. He sat because he needed to think, and thinking required stillness. They knew we were going to declare war. They had to have known. No one pre-positions drone fields in enemy supply lines as a response. That kind of operation takes weeks of planning, weeks of quiet movement, weeks of... Wren stopped, and weeks of already being at war. "While we were preparing the ceremony," Valkorath said quietly, "they were already fighting." A sound from the communication station broke the silence. The officer there was listening hard to something, her face troubled. "Sir," she said, "I've been trying to intercept Terran military communications. I've been monitoring their frequencies for the last hour. I finally got a channel." "What are they saying?" "That's just it, sir. They're not saying anything. The channel is active. It's definitely a military frequency. It has the right encryption pattern. But all that's on it is," she hesitated, "a voice, reading a list." A list. A grocery list, sir. Vegetables, grains, household items. It's been going continuously for the last 40 minutes. The command deck went very quiet again. Tavail Korath looked at his intelligence officer, a lean, sharp-eyed Varek named Soval, who had spent 30 years studying alien communication systems. Soval was staring at the communication station with an expression that Vael Korath had never seen on him before, something between fascination and fear. Soval, Vael Korath said. What is that? Soval was quiet for a moment. Then he said, It means nothing on its own. So it's irrelevant? No. Soval turned to face him. That is not what I said. I said it means nothing on its own. What it means is that the actual orders, the real communications, are hidden inside it. The pattern of words, the pauses, the sequence. It is a code layered inside something that sounds harmless. Our translation systems would ignore it because it sounds like household chatter. He paused. Sir, we cannot read those orders. We don't have the key to the code. We don't know what they're telling each other. How long would it take to break it? Soval looked at him steadily. I don't know. Days, weeks, possibly never if they change the code regularly. Vael Korath stared at the star map. Somewhere out there, human commanders were talking to each other in the language of grocery lists, coordinating attacks he could not predict against targets he could not protect, using weapons he could not track. They had started the war before it was declared. They had hit him while he was standing in a ceremonial box waiting to fight fairly. They had made his entire beautiful fleet into a distraction. A young officer near the back of the deck spoke carefully, as if testing whether the words were safe to say out loud. Sir, do the humans not know about the Accords? Perhaps if we explain more clearly. They know, Vael Korath said. His voice was flat. We sent them the manual. Perhaps they didn't read it. Vael Korath almost said something sharp. Instead, he breathed slowly, evenly, the way his training had taught him. He thought about the human ambassador's face on the screen, the calm, unreadable face that had said, "We'll get back to you," without a flicker of uncertainty or confusion. He thought about the scout ship sitting in the asteroid field for 3 weeks. He thought about the drone fields quietly sleeping in the supply corridor, waiting for the moment they were most needed. They read it, he said. He stood up from his chair. They read it, he said again, and they made a choice. He looked at his officers. Good officers, loyal officers, experienced warriors who had fought 6, 8, 12 wars, and always come home because they understood the rules and followed them and could trust the enemy to do the same. We are not fighting the same war, he said quietly. We prepared for one conflict. They are fighting a different one entirely, and until we understand what that means. He looked back at the star map, at the small scattered worlds of the Terran Republic. We are already behind. He straightened. He clasped his hands behind his back again. His voice returned to the firm, level tone of command. I want everything we have on human warfare, every historical record we've accessed through the Galactic Archive, every field report from their own conflicts with each other, every piece of intelligence we gathered during the declaration period. All of it. And tonight, he paused, and double the escorts on whatever supply infrastructure we have left. His officers moved quickly. Vael Korath stood alone at the star map for a long moment. Far away, too far to see or sense, his supply lines were going dark one node at a time. His perfect fleet was chasing shadows across an asteroid field, and somewhere out there, a human voice was calmly reading a grocery list to nobody in particular. He had the uncomfortable feeling that the list was almost finished, and he did not know what would come next. The Varek War Council met for 6 hours before Vael Korath made the decision to escalate. The supply chain losses were bad but manageable. Enough reserves remained to sustain a long campaign. The drone swarms had done their damage, but drones were not an army. Drones could not hold ground. As to end this war the right way, to claim Hera's point, to settle the border dispute properly, to make the humans understand that there were consequences for what they had done, he needed to take the colony itself. That meant a siege. The Galactic Accords of Engagement were very clear on siege protocol. Before any orbital bombardment of a populated area, The attacking force was required to broadcast a 72-hour civilian evacuation warning. All civilian transports leaving the target zone were to be given free passage. Medical ships were untouchable. Surrender requests from the defending force would be answered within 6 hours. It was designed so that wars could be fought over territory without the people living on that territory being destroyed. It was, in theory, a humane system. Val-Karath believed in it. He had always believed in it. He broadcast the evacuation warning himself, in his own voice, translated into the 3 main languages spoken by the colony's population. He said, "You have 72 hours to evacuate all civilian personnel from Harris Point Colony. All civilian vessels will be given safe passage. Medical and emergency vessels will not be targeted. This is a lawful notice under the Galactic Accords of Engagement. Please evacuate in an orderly manner." He thought that was clear. He thought that was fair. He had no idea what the humans were doing with those 72 hours. General Harlan Cross had been waiting for the evacuation notice. He had expected it. The moment his intelligence team told him the Varric fleet was moving toward Harris Point, he had gathered his senior officers and said, simply, "They'll announce a 72-hour window. We're going to use every second of it." What followed was organized chaos of a very specific kind. The colony's civilian population was real, and it did need to be protected. Cross had no intention of using regular civilians as shields. That was not what he was doing. The civilians were evacuated. Every non-combatant with a child, an elderly parent, a medical condition, or no military training was put on transports and sent out of the combat zone. That part was real, but the other part was also real. The defensive positions that the Varric expected to find, the bunkers near the northern landing zones, the artillery placements along the ridgeline, the command post in the colony's main administrative building, were all quietly moved, not just repositioned, replaced. Where bunkers had been, engineers left behind convincing-looking empty structures with heat signatures designed to look like active defensive positions. The real defenses were rebuilt underground, in tunnels dug through the colony's maintenance infrastructure, in basements, in server rooms, in places that looked like nothing military from orbit. The 72-hour window also gave Cross's engineers time to work on the landing zones, not to fortify them against landing. That would have been too obvious. Instead, they were carefully prepared to look fortified, to invite an attack in specific places, to channel landing forces toward corridors where the real welcome was waiting, and the civilian transports, the ones leaving on free passage as allowed by the Accords, those were real too. Most of them carried exactly what they appeared to carry. But several of them also carried things that had nothing to do with civilian evacuation. Quiet things, stored in sealed containers marked as medical supplies. Things that would be very useful once the Varric fleet assumed the easy part was over. "Are we ready?" Cross asked on the morning of the 72nd hour. "Ready," said his ground commander, Colonel Petra Vasic, a compact woman with short-cropped hair and a long scar along her left jaw that she had earned in a different war, on a different world, years before any of this. "They'll think they're landing into a defended position. They'll hit the bait zones first. The moment their boots are on the ground, they'll be in the tunnels with us." "Keep it tight," Cross said. "Don't let them consolidate. Keep them moving." Vasic smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Yes, sir." The Varric landing force came down hard and fast, as a proper assault should. 300 landing craft, dropping from the fleet in coordinated waves, guided by orbital sensor data that showed them exactly where the human defensive lines were. The bunkers, the artillery, the command posts. The first wave hit the northern landing zone with full force, expecting resistance and prepared for it. What they found was empty buildings with heat generators inside them. The second wave, redirected by confused commanders, pushed toward the ridgeline. The ridgeline was also empty, but the approach to it was not. It was a narrow corridor between 2 hills, and as the Varric troops moved through it, the ground itself seemed to wake up. Not with fire, not yet, but with noise, disorientation, sensors jamming, communication equipment going strange, small devices buried in the path. Not lethal, not yet, but designed to make the Varric sensors show false readings, to scatter formation signals. To make a unit of 300 soldiers feel suddenly uncertain about where their friends were. And then from positions that appeared on no orbital scan, the humans began to fire. Not in a line, not in a wall of defense that could be measured and answered. From everywhere. From behind rocks that shouldn't have held anyone. From below ground through holes that opened and closed quickly. From the dark windows of buildings that had registered empty on every scan. One shot, then movement. Another shot from a different angle. Small teams, twos and threes, hitting and vanishing before a response could be organized. If Varric military doctrine was built around cohesive unit engagement, large formations moving together with air support, suppressing fire, clear lines of communication. What was happening to them now was none of those things. There was no front to push against. There was no line to break. Every time a Varric commander tried to identify where the heaviest fire was coming from, it had already stopped and started somewhere else. 3 days into the ground campaign, Vel-Korath received a report that made him sit down very slowly and stare at the floor. One of his ground commanders, a decorated officer named Tal, had succeeded in capturing a human soldier near the eastern edge of the colony. A young man, barely into adulthood by human standards, pale-skinned, dark-haired, and wearing dirt-covered combat clothes with no rank insignia and carrying only basic equipment. Nothing special about him, by the look of things. Tal, following the accords as he always did, had offered the prisoner water, removed his weapons, informed him of his rights as a prisoner of war under Galactic Accord Article 19, and asked him to provide the surrender code for his unit, the standard code that, if transmitted, would signal nearby human forces to stand down and await formal capture protocols. The young man had drunk the water. He had been polite about it. He had even said thank you. Then he had handed Tal a small metal ring, holding it out in his open palm, as if offering it as a gift. It was a grenade pin. Tal had looked at the pin. Then he had looked at the soldier. Then he had looked at his chair. The chair he had been sitting in for the last 4 minutes of conversation. The grenade was under the chair. Tal survived because he moved fast and his men moved faster. The detonation destroyed the room and 3 other rooms adjoining it. Tal himself lost 2 fingers and his hearing in 1 ear. His aide lost more. When this report reached Vel-Korath, he read it 3 times. Not because he did not understand it, but because he needed to understand what it meant. The soldier had said thank you for the water. He had been polite. He had followed the conversation, answered basic questions, given no indication of hostility. He had just been waiting for the right moment, in the most dangerous way possible, in a situation where the accords said both sides were supposed to be acting in good faith. He violated the prisoner protocol, Wren said, reading over Vel-Korath's shoulder. He violated every protocol, Vel-Korath said. We should file a complaint with the Galactic Arbitration. Wren! Vel-Korath turned to look at him. His voice was not angry. It was something quieter than anger, which was somehow worse. Do you think the humans are worried about what the Galactic Arbitration Council thinks of them? Wren didn't answer. The Galactic Arbitration Council, as it happened, had already been trying to contact the Terran Republic's War Ministry for 11 days. They had filed 3 formal complaints regarding Terran violations of the Accords: the pre-war drone positioning, the use of the civilian evacuation window for military repositioning, and now the prisoner incident. They sent the complaints to the standard diplomatic address. They sent copies to the backup address. They sent copies to the embassy on Hera's Point, which was no longer manned because there was currently a war happening there. They received no response. On the 12th day, a council administrator found a contact number listed under Terran Republic Defense Ministry, General Inquiries in the Galactic Registry. He called it. A recorded voice thanked him for contacting the Department of Veterans Affairs and asked him to press 1 for English and 2 for Spanish. He pressed 1. He was put on hold for 40 minutes and then the call disconnected. The council sent another written complaint. On the ground at Hera's Point, on the 14th day of the siege, Colonel Vasek was crouched in a maintenance tunnel 6 meters underground. Amar reviewing reports on a dusty tablet while a young corporal held a torch above her shoulder. The Varric ground forces had taken the colony's surface level twice. Both times they had found it empty. Both times, the moment they tried to consolidate their position and prepare for the next push, the ground below them had turned lethal. Tunnel exits opening up behind them, improvised obstacles appearing overnight, supplies mysteriously drying up. It was not glorious fighting. It was not the kind of fighting that people wrote songs about. It was exhausting, confusing, dirty, and relentless. But it was working. "They're pulling the 2nd Regiment back to the landing zone," her intelligence officer reported. "Looks like a resupply run. They're rattled." "Good," Vasich said. "Hey, we lost 12 people today." "I know." She looked at the names on her tablet. "I know." She was quiet for a moment. Then she folded the tablet under her arm and stood up in the narrow tunnel. "Keep the pressure on," she said. "Don't let them rest." And in the dark underground, her soldiers moved like water through rock, everywhere and nowhere, impossible to hold, impossible to stop, fighting the way humans had always fought when someone had pushed them hard enough, not by the rules, just to win. The conference room on the Varek flagship was not built for despair. It was built for planning, for strategy, for the orderly movement of forces and the management of victory. The table was long and polished. The chairs were formal and precise. The wall screens showed the positions of every ship in the fleet in clean color-coded lines. But at this moment, none of those clean lines meant very much. Vail Korath sat at the head of the table and looked at his senior commanders. He had called this meeting not to plan the next move. He did not yet know what the next move should be, but because he needed to understand something that had been growing in his mind for 3 weeks like a stone-gathering weight, pressing down on everything else. He needed to understand who these people were. "So Val," he said, "you've been going through the Human Historical Archive. Tell me what you found." So Val, the intelligence officer, was seated halfway down the table. He was a careful man, precise with his words, slow to speak. But tonight he looked different. There was something in his face that Vail Korath had never seen there before in 30 years of working together. It took Vail Korath a moment to identify it. It was discomfort. "Yes," Soval said. He placed his hands flat on the table, as if he needed to steady himself. "I have reviewed the galactic archive records for the Terran species, as well as the historical documents obtained through diplomatic channels during the 60 years of contact. I have also cross-referenced with battlefield observation data from the current engagement." "And," Vail Korath said. Soval looked at the table for a moment. "Before I give you my report," he said, "I want to say something. What I am about to describe is not fabricated. I have verified these records through multiple sources. I have cross-checked dates, locations, and figures. Everything I am going to tell you is accurate, to the best of our knowledge." "Go ahead." Soval touched a panel in front of him. In one of the wall screens changed, showing a map of a single planet, the human homeworld, third from a mid-sized yellow star. The planet was mostly blue and green, covered in water and land, not unlike a dozen habitable worlds in the region. "The humans have been a spacefaring species for approximately 120 years, Soval said. "They have been part of the galactic community for 60. Before that, they were confined to their home star system. Before that, they had no space travel at all." He paused. "What I want to focus on is what they were doing during all of that time, before they reached space, before they met any of us." He touched the panel again. The map of their world was replaced by a long list of dates and names, column after column, stretching from the top of the screen to the bottom. "When these are recorded conflict," Soval said, "wars fought by humans against other humans on their home planet before space travel. I am not going to read all of them. There are thousands." He let that number sit in the air for a moment. Thousands of recorded wars fought over thousands of years before they ever left their world. Around the table, the commanders shifted in their seats. No one spoke. "What I want to do," Soval continued, "is walk you through a small number of specific examples. Not to give a history lesson, but because I think we need to understand what we are actually dealing with." He started with numbers. A conflict that the humans called the Second World War, fought on their single planet using weapons they had built with their own hands, on Earth before they had computers or energy weapons or any technology more advanced than chemistry and metal. Fought between large groups of humans called nations, 40 to 50 million dead, 6 years of total war. Civilian populations bombed, cities destroyed, entire communities erased, supply lines attacked, Deception used systematically. Soldiers sent into battle knowing they would not come back in order to slow the enemy by 2 hours or 1 day so that the next unit could be positioned. Note the scale, Sobel said. 40 to 50 million deaths on a single planet in a single war before space travel. Velkorath said nothing. He was looking at the numbers on the screen. And the outcome? Admiral Wren asked quietly. One side won, Sobel said. The other side surrendered. Then within 15 years, many of the defeated nations were rebuilding and within 50 years had become among the most prosperous on the planet. The war ended. Life continued. That's, one of the younger commanders began. I'm not finished, Sobel said. He moved to another example. A conflict in a cold northern country, a city called Stalingrad, fought over the course of several months in conditions of extreme cold, temperatures that would kill an unprotected organism within hours. Two large armies fighting over a single ruined city, street by street, building by building, room by room. Soldiers holding single floors of buildings while the enemy held the floor above. Snipers operating alone for days at a time. Supply lines so thin that soldiers were surviving on minimal rations while continuing to fight. Hundreds of thousands of casualties. Where they fought in the ruins, Sobel said. The city was destroyed around them while they were inside it. Buildings were bombed flat. Then the soldiers fought in the rubble of the buildings. When the rubble was destroyed, they fought in the holes the rubble had left. The room was quiet. Who won? Someone asked. One side, Sobel said. Eventually. He moved on. He showed them a conflict called Thermopylae, ancient, fought with no technology beyond metal and physical strength, where a small force of around 300 soldiers held a narrow passage against a force estimated in the thousands for 3 days. Knowing they would all die, choosing to hold because slowing the larger force down gave their civilization time to prepare. They all died. The larger force won the battle, but the civilization they were protecting survived. Admin is counted to this day as one of the foundations of human culture. They celebrate this, Sobel said. 300 men who died holding a passage they could not hold. They tell the story to their children. They name things after these soldiers. No one said anything. Sobel moved to a conflict called Vietnam. A powerful human nation with advanced technology and enormous resources fought against a much smaller, less equipped force in a dense jungle environment. The smaller force did not fight in lines. They fought from tunnels, an entire network of tunnels dug by hand under the jungle floor. They ambushed. They disappeared. They hit supply lines and vanished into the trees. The larger, more powerful nation could not defeat them. Not because it lacked the strength, but because the smaller force simply refused to stop. Now, after many years, the larger nation withdrew. Velkorath felt something move through him when he heard this. He did not say what it was. Tunnels, said Colonel Farah, one of his ground commanders. Her voice was flat. They fought from tunnels. Yes, Sobel said. She looked at Velkorath. Our forces at Hera's Point are being fought from tunnels. I know, Velkorath said. Sobel continued. He showed them a conflict where a force was so heavily outnumbered that by every reasonable military calculation, they should have surrendered within days, and instead held out for months, living in broken buildings, eating almost nothing, fighting at night when their enemy's technology was less effective, fading away when pressed and reappearing when the pressure lifted. He showed them a conflict where soldiers, alone in a jungle, with no communications and no information, continued fighting for decades after the war had officially ended, because no one had told them it was over. Decades, Sobel said. One soldier, alone, for decades. General Rath, the oldest commander at the table, a veteran of 14 wars, cleared his throat. He said very slowly, every species we have fought, every single one, has had an instinct for when the war is finished, a breaking point, a moment where the body and the mind agree that the cost is too high and it is better to survive than to continue. He paused. It is natural. It is universal. He looked at the screen. How long did that soldier in the jungle fight? 29 years, Sobel said. General Rath closed his eyes. Velkorath stood up and walked to the star map. He looked at Hera's Point. His fleet was still there, still superior in numbers. His ground forces still outnumbered the human defenders by at least 5-1. By every conventional military measure, he was winning this war. But he had been winning for 3 weeks. And in that time, his supply chain had been gutted, 2 of his ground regiments had been pulled back for reorganization, 3 of his officers had been injured or killed in situations the Accords said should have been safe, and his fleet was burning through resources it could not easily replace while patrolling against an enemy it could barely find. "Run the projection," he said. His strategic analyst, a quiet woman named Viss, had already done it. She put the numbers on the screen without comment. At current attrition rates, a Varric victory over Hera's Point was achievable. But the projected cost was 60% of the forward fleet, approximately 4 years of sustained operations, and an economic impact on the Varric supply infrastructure that would take, at minimum, a century and a half to fully recover from. One small colony world. 3 light hours from nothing important. Valkorath stood and looked at those numbers for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "What kind of species does this?" No one answered right away. Then Saval said, "A species that has been doing it to itself for 10,000 years. A species that survived on their own world, every attempt to wipe them out, by weather, by disease, by each other." He paused. "They did not become who they are in spite of the chaos they lived through. They became who they are because of it. They are built for this, Commander. Yadam, it is not strategy to them. It is memory." General Wrath opened his eyes. He looked at the map. "I have fought 14 wars," he said. "I have never not known at some point that it was going to end. Even in the worst ones. Even when we were losing, badly. I always knew there was a shape to it. A conclusion approaching." He looked at Valkorath. "I do not feel that here. I have been trying to find that feeling since this campaign began. The sense that the other side is approaching its limit." He shook his head slowly. "I cannot find it." The room was quiet for a long time after that. Outside the flagship's windows, the stars were calm and cold and distant. In the dark between those stars, a young civilization that had been fighting itself for 10,000 years was digging tunnels and speaking in grocery lists and doing precisely what it had always done when someone came at them hard enough. It was not rage. It was not pride. It was not even, exactly, stubbornness. It was something older than all of those things. It was simply the way they were. And no one in that conference room, not even Soval, who had studied them the longest, could say with any confidence when or whether it would stop. The peace request came from the Varric side. This was not how things were supposed to go. In every war Valkorath had ever fought, the side requesting peace was the side that was losing. The side with fewer ships, fewer soldiers, fewer resources. The side that had reached its limit and acknowledged it. And that was the natural shape of things. That was how the Accords defined it. You fought until one side could not continue, and then that side asked for peace, and the other side granted it, and everyone went home. By every measure Valkorath's staff could calculate, the Varric were not the side that was losing. His fleet still outnumbered the humans by a wide margin. His soldiers on the ground still outnumbered the defenders of Hera's Point. He had more ships, more weapons, more resources, more experience in the formal art of war than the Terran Republic had accumulated in its entire 60 years as a spacefaring civilization. But the projections were clear, and Valkorath was, above all else, a practical man. He had sat with those numbers for 2 days. He had walked the corridors of his flagship at night when he could not sleep, moving through the quiet ship with only the hum of the engines for company, thinking. He had looked at the maps. He had looked at the casualty reports, not just his own, but the human ones too, which his intelligence team had partially reconstructed from intercepted communications. The humans were losing people. They were losing people at a rate that should have broken a smaller, less stubborn force weeks ago. They were not broken. He had read Soval's report 3 more times. He had sat with the image of that soldier in the jungle, fighting alone for 29 years because no one had told him it was over. He had thought about what it meant to be a species that considered that story worth telling to children, worth remembering, worth naming things after. And he had made a decision. "Send the request," he told Wren. "Formal cease operations communication. Standard format. I wanted to reach their war ministry before morning. Ren did not argue. Something in Val Korath's voice had made argument feel unnecessary. General Cross received the message at his desk in New Ankara, along with his morning coffee. He read it twice. Then he set it down and looked at the window for a while. Outside, the mountain city was beginning its morning. Lights coming on, transports moving through the early air, ordinary life happening at a careful distance from the war it was funding and watching and waiting through. He thought about Hera's Point, about Vasek and her tunnels, about the 12 names he'd memorized every morning for the past 5 weeks, about the 40,000 civilians who'd been evacuated and were now living in temporary housing on 2 different worlds, waiting to go home. He picked up his communicator. "Tell them yes," he said. "Neutral ground. Ambassador Vasquez. 1 week from today." The meeting was held on a small station in unclaimed space, roughly equidistant between Varric and Terran territory. It was a modest place, used normally as a trading waypoint, staffed by a mixed crew of 3 different species, none of whom were involved in the conflict. The conference room was functional rather than elegant. Plain walls, a plain table, chairs of different designs to accommodate different body types. Val Korath arrived first. He was in formal dress, every medal on his chest, his posture correct. He had spent the journey preparing what he would say. He had prepared it carefully. Ambassador Lena Vasquez arrived 7 minutes later, with 2 aides and no medals, in a dark jacket that could have belonged to anyone. She set a plain data tablet on the table, poured herself a glass of water from the carafe in the center of the table, and sat down. She looked at Val Korath across the table. He looked at her. "Commander," she said. "Ambassador," he said. A brief silence. Then Val Korath opened the folder in front of him. "I would like to propose a formal ceasefire to be followed by a negotiated settlement of the Hera's Point border issue. We are prepared to—" "Before we get to terms," Vasquez said, "can I ask you something?" He paused. "Yes." She looked at him without expression. "Why did you stop?" It was a direct question. Val Korath had not expected it to be that direct. He set down his folder and considered it properly. "The projected cost," he said after a moment, "even a successful conclusion to the campaign would have cost us more than the colony was worth, in ships, in resources, in time to rebuild." "So you weren't beaten?" "No," he said. "But you stopped anyway." "Yes." Vasquez nodded slowly, as if he had confirmed something she had been thinking about. "That's interesting," she said, "because that's how we ended our own wars too. Eventually, not always quickly, but eventually, when someone looked at the cost and decided it was too high." She paused. "It just sometimes took us a very long time to reach that point." "How long?" he asked. She thought about it. "Depends on the war. Sometimes years, sometimes decades." She looked at the table. "And sometimes the people doing the fighting weren't the ones deciding the cost was too high. Sometimes it was the people watching the fighting, the ones paying for it, the ones losing children to it, who made that decision first." Val Korath was quiet for a moment. "In the Galactic Accords," he said carefully, "there are established thresholds. 40% fleet losses triggers a mandatory ceasefire request. It removes the ambiguity. It removes the extended suffering." "I know what the Accords say," Vasquez said. "Your republic does not recognize the Accords." "No," she said simply. "Is there any circumstance under which you would?" She looked at him, not unkindly, not with hostility, just with the steady, clear-eyed look of someone who was going to tell the truth because they saw no reason not to. "No," she said, and he had expected this. He asked anyway. "Why?" Vasquez picked up her water glass and turned it slowly in her hands. "Because the Accords assume that both sides will follow them," she said. "And the moment we agree to follow them, we have to trust that you will follow them too. And if you follow them and we follow them, then we fight in the box you described, in the zone you chose, at the time you set, with the weapons you know about." She set the glass down. "And if you break the rules even once, we've already told you where we'll be. We've already shown you everything." "We would not break the rules," he said. "You believe that," she said. "I believe that you believe it. But we don't fight based on faith in someone else's honor. We fight based on what we can control." She folded her hands on the table. I know that sounds cynical to you, but we've had a long time to learn that lesson. On our own world, mostly, against each other. Valkarath looked at her for a moment. Soval read me your history, he said. She raised an eyebrow slightly. Which part? Enough of it. She nodded slowly. I want to ask you something, he said. Something that may sound strange. Go ahead. If we had not stopped, if we had continued, regardless of the cost, would you have stopped? The question sat on the table between them. Vasquez did not answer immediately. She looked at him with the same steady, unreadable expression she had worn at the beginning, the expression he had first seen when she said, "We'll get back to you." And he had thought it was a translation error. I don't know, she said finally. He stared at her. Anam, I think we would have kept going for a very long time, she said. I think it would have gotten much worse before it ended. And I think that even if you had taken Hera's Point and every other border colony and pushed all the way to our core systems, I think there would have been people still fighting from the rubble. She paused. Not because they thought they could win, just because that's what we do. The room was very quiet. Valkora thought of a soldier in a jungle, fighting for 29 years, alone. He thought of children being told that story as something worth remembering. He picked up his folder and smoothed the paper inside it. Shall we discuss terms, he said. Yes, she said. Let's. The peace agreement took 9 days to finalize, where the border at Hera's Point was adjusted slightly in the Terran Republic's favor. Not because the humans demanded it, but because the Varric legal team determined it was the most defensible position, given the circumstances. Reparations were discussed briefly and then quietly dropped when Vasquez pointed out that the drone strikes on the supply chain had been responding to an act of military aggression, and the conversation had moved on. Civilian evacuees from Hera's Point were cleared to return within 30 days. It was not a triumphant peace. It was not a shamed one either. It was simply an ending. The kind of ending that happened when two sides looked at the cost and decided, at the same time, that enough was enough. 3 months later, the Galactic Arbitration Council published an updated version of the Galactic Accords of Engagement. The update included a new appendix, a short section added at the end of the document, after all the articles and protocols and established procedures. It was titled Non-Compliant Civilizations. Modified Engagement Considerations. There was one entry under the heading. It described in careful legal language that the Terran Republic had formally declined participation in the GAE framework, and that any species intending to initiate hostilities against them should be aware that standard accord protocols could not be assumed to apply, and that engagement planning should account for significant deviation from established norms. In plain language, they do not follow the rules. Plan accordingly. The entry was included as a warning. It was written in the tone that warnings were written in, cautious, sober, suggesting without quite saying that the reader should think carefully before proceeding. Most species who read it understood it as a warning. They updated their own defense protocols. They noted the entry in their threat assessments. A few even sent quiet diplomatic overtures to the Terran Republic, seeking to make clear in advance that they had no hostile intentions and hoped the feeling was mutual. But there were others, a smaller number, who read the same entry in a different way, who read the careful legal language and saw something else behind it. Not a warning, not a threat. Something closer to a statement of fact. A statement that said, here is a species that built itself in fire, that fought its own wars for 10,000 years before it ever met another living thing among the stars, that learned the hardest possible lessons about survival and carried those lessons into space. A species that did not fight by the rules. Not because it was cruel, but because it had been paying attention. Those few who read it that way did not update their threat assessments. They updated something else, something that was not quite fear and not quite admiration, but lived quietly in the space between the two, like a star at the edge of a map, noted, marked, and treated with great care. The Terran Republic went on being what it was. The stars outside the window of every ship in every fleet remained calm and cold as they always had. And somewhere in the galaxy, and in a filing cabinet in a government office that no one visited very often, a document waited. The simplified Varric Guide to Honorable Warfare, with its helpful diagrams, translated carefully into 3 human languages. Unopened, still in its original envelope, as it had always been.